On this episode of Textbook, we're speaking with Caitlin Webster, Executive Director of Auxiliary Services at St. Bonaventure University. Caitlin oversees a broad portfolio that includes the campus bookstore, dining, events and conferences, vending operations, and even a university golf course. Prior to stepping in this role, she led the university's Office of Events and Conferences, where she grew the team and expanded the operations to support more than 5,000 annual events, while also driving consistent year-over-year revenue growth through external venue rentals. Her expertise also includes working across campus construction and renovation projects, giving her unique perspectives on how physical space, operations, and partnerships come together to shape the student experience. Today, her work is focused on strengthening campus partnerships, building more efficient and scalable systems, and identifying new ways auxiliary services can contribute to both the business and mission of an institution. As always, the views shared here are those of the host and our guest, and not necessarily those of any current or former employer. Let's get into it with Caitlin.
Dr. Andy, how's it going?
It's great. For those that don't know, we normally record this at 5:30 in the morning. Today, I get to wake up at 6 because it's a state holiday. I'm loving it.
A little bit of sleeping in time before we record a podcast is always great. I'm really excited for this episode. You know, as the podcast has started, we've really worked with a lot of guests that we're familiar with, that we have some sort of rapport we've worked with along our journeys. So for this episode, we actually get to talk to somebody new who neither one of us have any rapport with or really background on, which I think is going to be super cool. So Caitlin, it is so great to have you here. Thank you so much for making that connection on LinkedIn and, you know, making the comment and figuring out how we could make this work. So we're so excited to have you here.
Yeah, thank you both. I really appreciate being given this opportunity. Especially as I've listened the last few episodes and heavily on the bookstore. I thought, am I going to fit into this discussion? But it's been great to kind of hear everything that you guys are talking about throughout each. So I'm excited.
Awesome. Yeah. And we have been a little bit bookstore heavy to start with the podcast, but really the whole point of Textbook, even though it has Textbook in the name, is to highlight auxiliary services, you know, which the bookstore falls under. And I have familiarity with the bookstore when it comes to auxiliary services and really nothing else in that vertical. But there is so much great work that's happening, you know, in our auxiliary services, in our bookstores, dining, parking, housing, where all these things that are really great that are happening. And I feel like it's not celebrated enough. And that was the whole point of doing this. So to start us off, for folks who aren't familiar with you or don't know your background, can you share a little bit about your career path and how you found your way into auxiliary services?
Yeah. So definitely, I mean, I think a lot of people kind of stumble into higher education and auxiliary. Definitely when I went to college, it was actually my first summer after my freshman year, I was offered to work for the auxiliary department at that time. Helping the director of auxiliary services with different filing and working a front desk. Didn't really, I don't think at the time, kind of grasp what I was learning and kind of the knowledge that was being shared with me. And then had a great opportunity to stay on with that department through my entire 4 years of my undergrad, and thought, okay, I'm going to, big plan, I'm going to go into the corporate world. That's where I thought I was headed, and did that for a couple of years, and then found my way back to within higher education. Mainly have come up through events and conferences throughout the years. I've always reported to our finance and administration department at the university. As it was a little bit before 2020, given the opportunity to kind of I was brought to the table a little bit more for different discussions when it came to, dining in the bookstore, our vending. And the next thing you know, I was becoming the point of contact for our beverage suppliers and our, that to, make sure things were stocked and to give them a point of contact. And then really for the last year, I've had the opportunity to even learn more in really a lot of the relationships and partnerships that I've made throughout the event side of things, been able to emphasize those even more, and became official in November. But really, I'd say for probably about the last year, been kind of playing, a little bit of that, dipping my toes in a little bit more to the strategic side of things. So here we are, and I'm just trying to act as a sponge to soak up things that I don't know and all these amazing ideas and just this, whole world out there of the auxiliary and the ideas that get thrown around, and to see what we can do and bring back to campus and the community here.
Can you tell us a little more about your campus and your community at St. Bonaventure venture?
Yeah. So, definitely a small campus. It's a private Franciscan university, and we really go off of that our kind of our core is we go with compassion, wisdom, and integrity. That's the words that we try to live our daily life by when we're here on campus. Small institution. We've got close to almost 2,000 undergrad, about another 1,000 on online master's programs, whether online or in person. But definitely one of those unique, and I think every college has something that's unique about them. But we always say when we're talking to people is, I could be walking from one building to the next, never have seen this student or this faculty member or anybody, and they'll be holding the door, smiling in the face. You hope it's not that awkward, like it's too far away, where you've kind of got to do like a little bit of a jog to get there. So there's definitely that like personal people want to interact. They smile and wave where, sometimes you get where it's just like, I'm going to walk by really quick and, keep my head down. There is at least the acknowledging that other person is there. So we are in Western New York. It is 70 degrees today. Tomorrow it's supposed to be 30. So I've had commencement weekends where it's snowing and where people are in shorts and t-shirts. So we take all seasons all the time.
Yeah. From an outside perspective of New York, when you think of New York, you begin thinking of New York City.
Yes.
I don't think that's a fair way to think, but I think it's just kind of, if you watch TV, everything, when people say New York, you're thinking about New York City. And there's a whole other New York out there.
There is.
And I think you painted a real good picture that, it's not exactly what you see on TV kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, I look in New York City, they always say it's kind of the concrete jungle where, you come here and we're a 400 plus acre campus with one of the biggest lawn spaces around, and 20 minutes down the road are beautiful state parks. So we're really kind of surrounded by nature, which I think really brings a lot to this campus in this area.
and you probably also have a lot more space to work with from an auxiliary perspective that gives you more opportunities to do things that don't have to be in a vertical tower.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. We're always trying when the weather is nice, how much can we, expand to use our outside and the facilities and get ourselves out of buildings. That's it. You can tell the itch is on right now that everybody's ready to be able to come out of these brick walls for a while.
Yeah. I'm sure that allows you to activate a lot of great promotions and great activities kind of in that
Yeah,
sense.
and that's a lot of our auxiliary partners that they're even doing is how do we get students out of their rooms? How do we get them to come out and kind of socialize and doing different pop-ups and getting them moving around campus? Yes, we always look forward to this time of year when we can really use our campus to its full extent.
So maybe backtracking just a little bit. I don't think I officially said congratulations on the new position. I
Thank
think that's a
you.
real exciting thing to hear that you've moved into this position. And it kind of sounds like there was a little transition before you actually officially got it, but
Yeah,
congratulations on the new
thank
role.
you.
How has the transition been going for you?
Yeah. This is an entirely new role for the university. So I think that's been one of the biggest things. Right now, it's a lot of people are going, wait, what is this? What are you doing? How is this different than what you've been doing the last, little bit? So I think that's been kind of the biggest thing is to get, people to see me in a kind of a different avenue and path while still being attached to like the event side and that things. It's been interesting to kind of learn that and be able to finally kind of peel back the layers of the contracts and all of that and be given more of that in-depth insight. So that's been something that I've just feels like it's kind of been a lot all at once. But I think the good thing is I've been here for several years. So I've had the opportunity where I've built these great relationships with the partners already. So that part was already there. And so we kind of jumped ahead, I think, a lot of times of what happens that we got past that kind of the new, and we've been able to say, okay, like what do we want to focus on? What's the priority at this point for there? So yeah, so it's been interesting. It's been interesting, I think, even for myself to understand that I'm not doing some of the things that I used to, even though my office is still where it's been in the same building and walking the same sidewalks, but just interacting in a different way.
Have you been able to backfill your previous position?
No, so that has not been backfilled. Really, kind of what's been done is we're kind of mapping out how the events and how the buckets are filled. So kind of spreading it out a little bit more. So, and that's been great. When this was presented to me, I was asked, okay, put an org chart together. What does this look like? Think not just now, but what's 3, 5, 10 years. So there's a plan in place depending on where we go. But for right now, I've got a great team that I've been able to promote a few other people with my change that we're ready for those kind of added responsibilities. So there's been kind of that flow at that point, this point.
And I think that's one of those things that happens in these transitions is sometimes it's like you have your previous job and you're just given more. And I think that always makes it very challenging to step into a new role if you're still having to do your previous role. And it sounds like you've gotten some support
Yeah.
where some other people have been able to step up and take some of those things off your plate, but you're still probably doing some of the work that you previously were.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, even within higher education, I feel like you kind of find that. And having been here for so long, I think there's sometimes a little bit of that we lean on, people that we know have
Mhm.
been here and kind of know. Whereas if I, was up and gone or it was somebody brand new who didn't have that historical knowledge, everybody would have figured out a way. But oftentimes it's easy. Well, they've been here. They know this. Why can't we ask them to, do that?
I guess that kind of brings up a question. There's been some things you're probably fairly familiar with. Now we're kind of going in, but there's also some new things on your plate.
Hmm.
Has there been
Yes.
anything that's really just surprised you about the role?
I think I knew it was going to be strategic. I didn't realize, I think at the time, how strategic it was going to be with every single, it feels like almost every single decision I've got to look at how does that impact, the student engagement part? How does that impact enrollment? How does that impact revenue? And to kind of look at all of those and say, okay, what is, what I'm being told from top down? What's the priority? So I think that was, I knew that. I knew part of it. I think it's just that kind of that sense of like, these are impactful decisions that really can kind of direct things going in very specific ways. And so I think that's took me a little bit more by surprise than I think I was quite prepared for, but getting there.
And you've kind of come from an operational background. So that
Hmm.
does seem like a logical place for you to be moving into that more strategic, thinking about
Yeah.
how everything does impact students and enrollment. I'm sure because your school's a little smaller, those are very big concerns
Yeah.
for your operations is making sure that you have those positive effects on enrollment. I'm sure that there's some level of concern about budgets and finances and it's a interesting place for auxiliaries to live is because I think that auxiliaries can have a lot of effects on, those types of things.
Yeah.
So is your leadership looking for that or is it just something that you're very conscious of?
I think leadership is and something becoming even more conscious of.
Mhm.
And like you said, small institution where, it's kind of that look of you've got that tuition side of the academic side, but then there is that auxiliary. That is a huge part. We are a highly residential campus. So there is, it is important to the students and their families what happens outside of the classroom, what they get to do. And budgets start to tighten and things get more expensive. It's okay, how are we supplementing the campus with additional revenue? Where is that coming from without putting a lot more on our students and what they're already kind of paying? I think one of the things too is I've always said that even like on the customer service or events auxiliary that kind of invisible in a way. And in that case, it's because things are going really well. So when things are running well and everything's falling into place, no, you don't really hear too much about it. But then when there needs to be, okay, something not quite right, or well, now we need to focus on this, or trying to get ahead of things before it impacts the students or before it even gets to, the senior management team and becomes a bigger issue or problem than you anticipated. So I think right now too, with our senior management team looking at what auxiliary means to campus. There has definitely been a focus of that because it just has kind of run stagnant for several years.
Okay. So, there is that revenue expectation, it sounds like. And I think conference and events is an interesting program because there is that real potential to make some revenue. And especially from outside sources from the university, where most programs, you're really looking at internal customers. And that's where affordability comes into play a lot. And you don't maybe not have those huge margins because you want to be affordable for students. You want to be affordable for your faculty and staff and departments, and it becomes sometimes more of a service. But conference and events, if you're pulling an outside body, you can kind of be a little bit more market focused, have a
Hmm.
little higher margins. Can you tell us about the conference and events program at St. Bonaventure?
Yeah.
What are you guys doing? Are you pulling from the community or is it just solely focused on students, faculty, and staff?
Yes. I always say we kind of have like two arms, two buckets. We've got that internal side of things, and then the last 5 or 6 years, really kind of focusing more on what does that external look like. Because that revenue side. When I first started within this department, it was one person just trying to manage just the internal side and helping with student programming and different departments and events. So that was kind of the focus when I first started, was to make it a really well run, kind of a one-stop shop set up for the institution. Because it was, you'd talk to me for this, but then you'd go talk to a different person about AV and a different person about catering and someone else about the room setup. And so kind of bringing that together. So that really for the first few years was the true focus, as making the internal experience, which was our students, our faculty, our staff, the events and programs that they were having, successful, and giving them kind of that place that they could meet. Thankfully, we don't really charge back our internal for anything unless like overtime for certain things. So building that model, I think, really was specific. And at that point, I was able to kind of add on other staff to say, okay, now we're, churning out all of these internal events and providing this support. We need that. So over the years, as we fine tuned, and I always said, like, our job is to make St. Bonaventure look good. Our job is to make sure that the individual, when they walk away from this event, they're like, wow, that was good. So when whoever they're talking about it to, it's like, oh yeah, I had this good experience here. So we did for a while. We had some really outdated facilities. I think most universities, if it's not broke, we're not going to fix it. And who cares if it looks like it's from 1950? So that was kind of that next phase of like, there was that push of, okay, we want to open campus. We want people to know that they can come to campus. They're welcome here. We're not closed off. So then that was kind of that next step is, okay, we want the community to feel like they belong here as well, and be a part of our campus. But the biggest thing was, we don't have the facilities to do that without us, not looking the best. So that was kind of that next phase of let's get our facilities up. There was a big focus. We heavily involved students in those discussions as well, because to me it was more, yes, we want to open our doors to external, but what are our internal constituents looking? What could we use that we don't even know? And so we were able to update some spaces. And then it was right before COVID. We had kind of kickstarted around this little, we called it St. Bonavenue, so a play off of St. Bonaventure. And that's what we kind of say is our external of, we're open. We want people to, want to have a good time here. And then we were able to, once we kind of got through everything with COVID, and that there was just a heavy push to say, okay, let's market this. Let's see what happens. It went from mainly alum reaching out to wanting to use space to now we're maxing out. We're sold out, until, next year at this point. And we also look at it too, is no matter what event you're having here, when they walk away from here, we want them to be like, I had a great experience at St. Bonaventure. Because you never know, student or anybody who's looking to get a college degree, come back to college, and they'll be talking, saying, hey, I went there and, they had this, and, I saw this flyers and these pamphlets that they've got this program. Did you know about this? So that's why I always say to the team, it's not, that's the money's, there, that's, what most people are looking at. But we want it to really, truly be about that experience and what we've provided. Anybody who's stepped foot on our campus. So that's always kind of been that focus, is that customer service model. And it's worked well, because we are getting that revenue side of it too. So it's tying in together. And again, I've got a great team that, they're all on board with that vision and making that happen on a daily basis.
So you have a huge expertise in the conference and event space arena. What are some of the behind the scenes elements that people might not realize are happening in these programs?
Yeah, I think when you walk into or you're attending an event or something, you kind of walk and everything's there, everything's ready to go, and you sit in your seat and you attend. So I think it's a lot depending on the nature of the event, all the logistics that really go behind it, and how important it is with the relationships and the partnerships that you're building, not only on campus, but in the community and with your vendors, because ultimately you're the one who's responsible for bringing all those people together to help make this function a success. So if you haven't built that relationship and, give or take as well, then it's not going to work out well. So I think that's a lot. And a lot of times too, it's understanding, kind of diving in and saying, okay, I'm not quite sure I understand like your side of it. Talk me through it. Talk me through why you're thinking, you want to go down this, path as we're kind of pulling this together. And I've always got a plan B, C, D, we'll go all the way through the whole alphabet. So it's just, and again, I think that's when you even talk about taking that customer service and kind of how your brain starts to work. It's like, okay, if we go down this way, how does that impact this particular area or individual or group? So there's always kind of that thought process going on.
I know we talked a little about space earlier, but there's one thing that as I was poking around on your website that I found interesting. I know if you look at auxiliaries, they're all over the place, right? I think some of us, even, and definitely not me, run cemeteries and those kinds of things. I didn't see you out at a cemetery, but I did see you had a golf course. Can you tell me a
Yeah.
little about how that works into your portfolio? How are you using that operation? It just seems like an
Yeah.
interesting thing to have.
It is, especially because our golf course is in a cemetery. So that really adds you quite literally drive into the cemetery and you take a right and that takes you to our golf course. So, that's what we always kind of laugh. We say, we do everything from birth to death all the way through. That's, kind of our joke on the inside. But the golf course was definitely new. I don't know how to golf. I bought myself a set of golf clubs, and that's my goal. My personal goal for myself this year is to learn and understand now that I've been overseeing a course for a year. uh, so it's one of the, not that it's that far away from our campus, it's not. You can walk across the street and, be at the hole, but it's also kind of always felt a little disconnected from the university. So that's been one of those things is we've got this great facility. We've got a bar restaurant up there that that's open for the season. It overlooks the course but again, it felt disconnected. So that was kind of one of those is how do you connect that back to the university and the mission to do that. So really that's been the focus. The first year was kind of learning the operation. It's actually truly one of the facilities that is self-operating. We do make a small revenue off of it, the end of the year. But there was that push to say, okay, let's start reaching out to students and getting them, up there. They can do a $20, $30 membership to golf for the year or the month that they're here. Opening that up to, the campus. So that's been kind of another thing too, is one of those where maybe it's felt closed off and we didn't even realize it. So how do we open that up and say, yeah, it's a weird spot to come to, but once you get here, you're going to have a great time. So as we start to learn more, and we'll work like our club sports, like our intramurals. So we've got our golf team now going up there, and using that space instead of going elsewhere. Just kind of working with even in the community, smaller tournaments, and that can use our space, kind of help support that. It's a work in progress. We're, constantly we're fine tuning what things look like and what we're offering, and even starting to think bigger, say, okay, we do have kind of all this extra space up there as well. What more can we do? What do the students and, community want to see? So yeah, it's a unique one.
How is the golf course funded? Are there other fees that like help? I'm familiar with one school who runs a golf course and they use revenue and income from other places to help fund it. Is it self-sustaining, or do you have to really invest in it?
It is right now, it is self-sustaining. So it's a 9-hole course. So that I think helps us is a smaller course. So we do have that as we start to look a little bit more what that might look like if we, add on or increase. I could see where we'll have to have more of that discussion of we're going to have to put some money towards that to make that happen. But look at that trajectory of, okay, once we, 5 years out, are we back to being, self-sustaining again? So yep.
And then I have to go back to the original comment about how you enter it through a cemetery.
Yeah.
In your role, are you in charge of the cemetery?
No, no. Thank goodness. Because I don't know how I'd feel about that one. That one gives me, I'm not quite sure. So no, the
Okay,
cemetery is
I was
still,
just real curious there.
yes. Yeah. So it is still separate, but it's just we share some driveway and some roads. So, and a little bit of some backyard.
So I have to say that would have been one of the more unique auxiliaries. And I know that there are auxiliaries that have cemeteries. I was like, to find one in the wild would have been an
Yeah.
interesting thing. I would have had a lot of questions on that one, but
So, Caitlin, we've talked a lot about the auxiliaries that you have on campus, and I am a bookstore course materials guy, and I know that a lot of the folks that we have on here are also course materials or bookstore folks. So can you tell us a little bit about your bookstore operation? What does it look like? How's it going? Or do you have a first day access program, or are you trying to get to a first day access program?
Yeah, so we right now we're contracted with Follett, and they've been here for probably 20 years at this point. And that's one of the things we've been, definitely having more conversation on. Our faculty, a lot of times, they've kind of done things how they've always done things, and it's hard to kind of get them to see that next. This is very beneficial to the students when they're like, well, they can just go to Amazon and buy that book. So one of the things that's, even as I learned, because the bookstore it's something that I really had to spend quite a bit of time just kind of researching and even talking with our campus and saying, okay, help me understand this, explain this to me. What does this mean? And then same thing saying, okay, well, what can I help you? We need to get you in front of the faculty. We need to get you in front of the deans to start talking about how important this is, because we need to make sure the students have what they need to be successful here, in their academics. And right now we're not quite there. So that's been a lot more of that conversation. And as I've, listened to, different individuals from the bookstores that you guys have been talking to, I'm kind of starting to, put the pieces together in my head to say, okay, this is essential that we really start to dive into these conversations. We need to take them seriously. So that's what we're working on right now, kind of a plan to get to our our management members to say, okay, can we start having these conversations? Because I do think we're a little behind on that here. And definitely something that I know the bookstore manager recognizes. I think also when we talk about contracted, there is that portion where their hands are kind of tied because they've got corporate telling them one thing, they've got us as their client saying, well, this. So there's oftentimes maybe not that flexibility that, we would have if we were just doing this on our own. So it's definitely being heavily looked into. And how do we keep pushing this without, letting a few individuals say, well, it's not, I don't know, we don't want to deal with it. I would say we're here for the students, and we need to make sure, that's our priority from there.
Right. And, I've been around a lot of those conversations. Well, they can just go here.
Hmm.
The point in the evolution of access programs is about removing the student from the acquisition process, right? The process of acquiring course materials is
Hmm.
burdensome. In
Hmm.
a lot of cases, you have to figure out what you need, where it's located, if you have the money to buy it. And really, for me, I look at access programs. It's not about cost. It's not about what material you're using. It's
Hmm.
about access. It's
Yes.
about removing the structural barriers to access to course materials.
Hmm.
So yes, can one or two students go on Amazon and buy it for a couple bucks cheaper? Sure. But the dynamic pricing is going to change that. There's a ton of different reasons why. Like, we can talk about educational theory. We can talk about learning theory. There's so many important aspects of ensuring that our students have first day access. And the other piece is, you're right. As a contracted store, I ran bookstores for a lease operator, and I said it's probably one of the most challenging jobs that I've had, because you really serve three bosses, right? You serve your company, you serve your students, and you serve your campus. And as a
Hmm.
bookstore manager in that space, you're never going to be able to make a decision or do something that satisfies all three. You're going to do one that's good for two, not good for one. It's a challenge sometimes to work through that. But I know that most managers that are running campus bookstores, they want to be there to serve the students. They want there
Hmm.
to be there to serve the campus. And
Yeah.
they want to help our students be more successful. That was what I wanted to do, right? It's like my company second, my campus and my students first. So, I hope that your store managers out there, and they know, just keep driving, keep pushing, keep talking about why the things that you are doing are important to what the future of St. Bonaventure looks like. We
Yeah.
want to increase graduation, we want to increase retention, we want to increase the opportunities that we're providing our students by simply removing that barrier of course materials.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's, how you say that in our store manager too, that's definitely her. The students, that's what she's always kind of thinking of. And I'm hoping that I can be that bridge to, what she's been shouting, but hasn't really had anybody to listen, that can help help bridge that gap. Because it's the accessibility is just, it's huge, and it's important. And everybody needs to understand that it's a different day and age.
As a store manager, having a campus contact who is a champion and can help open doors to places that I may not have been able to get to by myself. That, to me, as a store manager, is one of the most important things that I can get from a campus, is can you help me open this door? Or tell me what door that I need to knock on, because the ones that
Hmm.
I'm knocking on aren't
Yeah.
responsive. So you being that person for them, I think that could go so far in helping St. Bonaventure achieve whatever it is that they want to do next.
Yeah. I'm hopeful.
Now, now, when we look at the structure of how these agreements work and everything, sometimes there's a dedicated contract administrator for the bookstore, or, they have a couple auxiliaries in their portfolio that they're managing, overseeing the contracts for. Do you have someone that's besides yourself that's focused on the bookstore, or are you the direct representative to that contract?
So besides myself and my boss, we're it. So that's something too that we've talked about is there are a lot of individuals on campus, that do have, thoughts and ideas and opinions on how that should be. So it is, I think, again, part of my role too is to be able to have those conversations where the CFO just doesn't have time to be at all of those as much as, she'd love to. So it's, me really understanding kind of where those contracts are, what that means and seeing how we can maximize that and push that, and even open up the conversation to say, okay, this is what we might have signed, a certain amount of years ago, but let's come back to this. Let's talk about this. And does it make sense for 2026, 2027?
Yeah, and that always makes it hard, right? So because
Hmm.
in auxiliaries, there's so much to do and not enough hands on the deck, and
Yep.
you know
Yeah.
you're there's all these things you want to do, and it's kind of prioritizing and getting them through, and especially
Yeah.
these bigger lifts, you kind of have to plan it out a couple years almost in advance. Be
Yeah.
really thinking about it, building your coalitions and everything.
Yep. Yeah. And that's what I think, I've gotten to you for, this summer is, I've kind of got this list of, okay, here's what I'm hearing, here's what I'm being told, but how do we start to kind of put this into actionable pieces, but also have the conversation to see some of these things are not going to happen, next week. These are some things that are are over time going to need to be able to change, but let's get them down on paper and let's get these metrics and let's kickstart it.
Yeah. And, finding your champions on campus that are going to be supportive of ideas and
Yes.
everything.
Yep.
So we're talking about contracts here. One thing that I noticed about your university, and you have a contracted food services,
Hmm.
contracted bookstore.
Yep.
So you're working with a lot of contractors.
Yeah.
What is your approach to working with contractors? How do you build those strong relationships? And the other thing I know about you is at one point you were on the contracted side. So
Yeah.
you probably have some great insight on that.
Yeah, yes, and I think that's where I mean, to be honest, I think having that, little detour in my path, back to here on that corporate side is helpful because corporate world is it's about that, bottom line most of the time. So I think having that understanding and letting the partners know I understand that and I respect that because that is part of the world. So it's trying to find kind of that middle point of, what are we here for? What is our mission and our goal? That if we were to write things down on our own and then bring these together, what's overlapping? And so I think that's been a big thing, kind of having all these conversations, but also at the same time saying, okay, let's step out of our box a little bit. Let's have that. What does innovation look like? What does change look like? And how does that, benefit both sides? So, and again, it's really about building that partnership because again, it's got to be built out of trust and respect. Because if you don't have either one of those, then nothing's going to get accomplished because I feel like you're going to be always kind of on the defensive. So that's been one thing is to really, I'm not always contacting them when something's not working well. It's, hey, let's just have a brainstorming meeting. What are some fun things we can do? What are some fun initiatives? We just did that a couple weeks ago and we've got a big enrollment event coming up tomorrow and our bookstore is like, I'm gonna set up like a photo backdrop. I went out and bought a little Polaroid camera thing, just so when people come into the store, we can celebrate them. And, our dining's like, oh, we're gonna hand out, future Bonnie luggage tags and we're going to have different like snacks and stuff that, as they're at these different locations. So it's letting them also just have fun and not feel like the only time they're talking to us is when it's like, okay, we've had this problem or we need to address this. And so I think it's just recognizing we're all human and building that foundation of that respect and trust, because that's, I think, what goes the furthest for anyone.
It'd seem like it'd be less than ideal if the only time that you talk to one of your contracted services is a problem, because then
Yes.
it's like, well, Caitlin only talks to me when there's a problem, not like to tell me that I did a good job or like just
Yeah.
checking in on a regular basis. It's, we're missing, we didn't have a book, or the
Right.
cooler in the cafeteria was empty or something like that, right? That
Yeah.
seems that you want to build those relationships so you're talking all the time, and you're also not getting surprised, right? Like you're not going to be surprised when something happens because hopefully you've built that relationship with your contractor where they've given you a heads up that something's coming, or you're going to hear about this, but you're not hearing for the first time outside of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's been huge because I think even when I kind of unofficially transitioned last year before the official, it was they were even saying sometimes we feel like we don't even know what's going on at the university even though we're here. So that was important too that, we kick-started kind of a sub auxiliary group where we've got reps from, we've got our contracted vendors, but then we've got admissions and athletics and advancement and facilities sitting in the same room and just having that conversation. Say, here's what's going on. What are you hearing? What exciting things? And just making that a positive conversation to get everybody so that they feel like we've kind of have this group where now it's kind of become, hey, I want to run this idea. What do you all think about this? Or, hey, we've run into this. Does anybody have any advice how to handle this particular situation? So we're getting there.
That's kind of a really interesting concept of having that group. What does that look like in the practical sense? Are you guys meeting once a month in a big conference room? Is it an email group? Is it a Zoom meeting? How does that actually look in practice?
Yeah. Yeah. So we meet monthly. We've got a set time on everybody's calendar. It is in a conference room. But at the same time, this group is also talking to each other outside of that. There's kind of other little committee groups that have come off of that or just kind of bounce ideas off of each other. So I think it's been probably one of the most impactful things that I've seen in a while because you are kind of getting all these different areas the chance to just kind of come together and we said right off the bat, we don't want this to be anything about, complaining or what's not going right. We want it to be, let's brainstorm, let's talk like what fun thing are you doing? Is advancement doing something that admissions can team up with? Or, facilities is talking about putting picnic tables and all that stuff out. Where do we hear students talking about that? Can dining use that for pop up? That type of stuff. So it's been a great group of people just to get together. Sometimes we bring snacks, depends on the day. But I think one of the biggest things we've always said is important for us to be face to face and be able to sit in the room and just kind of have that chance to let down the guard and say, okay, we all are here. And we've said we're open to other people joining the committee, but there's always kind of that core group and part of being on that too is to go back and talk to, the others in your area. Say, hey, here's what we've talked about, but also bring that feedback back.
So as we've had this conversation, we've talked a lot about your transition into the role,
Mhm.
and you would unofficially official, all the things that you picked up
Yeah.
along the way, and then eventually it's like, well, why don't you just do this? So if you think about what you thought it would be and where you are today,
Mhm.
what are some of the things that someone who's getting into or wants to get into a role like yours in auxiliary, maybe do they not fully understand about the role, or what is something that they could do to prepare for this type of role that you've walked into?
I think it's being open to going down different paths that scare you. As I look back, kind of some of the different opportunities I've been given and some of the different situations I've been put in where I thought, am I capable of doing this? Do I have the background to do that? And being able to step back and be like, I can do this. I've figured this out. I can talk to people and reach out to my network. So I think that's kind of one of those big things is if it scares you, but still exciting, then go for it because that's where you're truly going to see what you're made of. So I think that was kind of the biggest thing was as I started to kind of take on some more things, I'm like, okay, what does a role like this look like, elsewhere? Because I'm say, okay, this is a potential trajectory that I can go to. But at the same time, when it was put in front of me officially, I was like, oh, like this is a lot. Are you sure? So, and I will say, I mean, I've had a really supportive, um, supervisors in the past, and even currently, was like, you can do this. We'll figure out, what this looks like, and doors always open to have the conversations if you're really stuck on something. So there's been that, but also that freedom to say like, you are figuring this out. So not everything is going to be 100% either. And that's oftentimes where I think as human beings we learn the most is when things don't go right, because then we can step back and be like, okay, what happened, or where did I, detour that kind of caused that decision. So I think it's being open. Like Andy and I kind of talked about, the strategic side of it. That was really huge. It came from my hands really kind of in the mix every day, that operations of really making sure that the day to day, to now it's more that strategic and that long term of, okay, how does this particular decision impact the students, the enrollments, our alumni, the revenue? Um, just understanding that more every day.
There's really two things that are interesting that came out there. So you mentioned network, right?
Hmm.
You said you reach out to your network.
Yep.
It feels like in your role, networking is important, in building on your network. And the other thing that you talked about that I find really interesting, and when I think in any industry, in any role, that transition from doer to thinker,
Hmm.
right? That is a really important transition where you can't afford to have your hands on everything every day like you used to when you were a doer, but now you're a thinker. So you have to have that strategic vision. And it feels like that's really important, um, to try to keep your hands off something and just think about how this aligns with everything else that your school's doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, a guy said to my team as I kind of was transitioning to this, I said, I have been so much a doer all the time that I know where I'm going to fall short a little bit, where I also need that reminder from you all to say, we've got this, we can do this. And I will say too, last year was put into our president, had kickstarted he's called it a leadership academy. That was, kind of looking across campus at individuals, that might be looking to step into other roles. So got that opportunity for a year to be able to dive into more, we got to hear from athletics, and we got to hear from advancement and academics, and hear from the people that are leading that on a day-to-day basis, where you're not necessarily thinking about that because that's not your day to day. So I think that really helped with that transition, because that's when I started to think more and say, okay, it's not necessarily do, it is there. This is an important role of making sure, things are coming together, but I'm not the one putting the pieces together every day anymore.
I'm hearing more universities are kind of going towards those programs. I know at my institution, they've been doing a program like that that gets you more
Hmm.
familiar with the entire university. I was able to take advantage of it. I think those are just amazing programs to be involved in if you can be involved in them. And I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear that you had that opportunity to be in that program. I'm sure that's really benefited you a lot, and especially on a small campus. Can't imagine the networking that came out of that and
Yeah.
the level of trust and stuff that you could build through a program of that nature, um, that can really have high impacts on your auxiliaries of what you can now do cross collaborations and those kinds of things.
Yeah, definitely that. And I think even just the respect for what some of these other positions do, because you didn't quite know. So hearing them talk about kind of their day to day, you're like, wow, like I never would have guessed.
And probably finding ways that you could support them,
Hmm.
or on the other hand, them learning more about yours where they're like, well, we can support you in this too. So, we've talked about a lot of things today.
Yeah.
What do you think people underestimate the impacts of auxiliaries, on a campus?
I think it's underestimating, especially on when I look at like our campus in particular, because it is highly residential, is how important it is to our students and their daily life. Obviously, they're here to get the degree and the academic side of it, but there is that other huge component that is, this is their world for, especially our undergrads for 4 years. And this is the life that they know. All of these components, dining, bookstore, vending, the opportunities that we're giving them, but also taking that back and saying, okay, we're listening to the students. We hear you. We know that you're looking for this. So I think a lot of times auxiliary that is what helps sell the students and their families when they come to experience campus. Yes, it's important that the academics and talking with that faculty and, our admissions counselors and staff do an amazing job, but really looking at the full package. That's what you're selling. So making sure that's on par is huge. And if it's not up to what you think, that could have significantly negative impact. So it's being willing to hear that and hone that in and be constantly looking at it.
Well, I want to really thank you for this conversation. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Dr. Mike doesn't know I'm going to do this right now, but I've enjoyed this conversation so much. I want to put you on the spot a little bit
Okay.
and ask, would you be willing to come back and talk to us in a year and so we can get an update on all the amazing things that you're doing and
Yes.
where things are going on your campus?
Yeah, that would be awesome. Let's lock it in.
Okay.
I'll put it on our calendars as soon as we're done. I think that's a really great offer. And the reason why is there's so much that we're going to learn and you're going to learn. We have a lot of folks out there that are maybe in your similar situation that we haven't met, that
Yeah.
we haven't had contact with. Our meeting was absolute chance. You made a
Yeah.
comment on a LinkedIn post, and
Yeah.
you just taken over in your new role. Being able to watch you and watch your journey, whether it's coming back on the podcast or whatever you're doing on LinkedIn, it would be such an honor and a privilege to be able to follow up and just see, did you get where you were going, and if you didn't, why not, and what
Yeah.
can we all learn from
Right.
that, if that's what it looks like later.
Yeah, that would be great. This would be awesome. And again, thank you both for the opportunity. This has been a great time to spend part of my day. So I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to keep hearing all the podcasts that you guys are going to be putting out.
Yeah, it really has been a fun kind of exercise in getting to engage with some of our professional peers.
Mm.
You know, you don't always get that.
Yeah.
Auxiliaries are a special place on a college campus, and you're dealing with a lot of people from outside of the industry. You sometimes have to look outside of your institution to find those conversations that resonate with you as an auxiliary services professional. And the podcast has been a great opportunity, even for us, to engage with people on, every week or so.
Yeah.
And so, just always enjoy it and really enjoyed this conversation today.
Yes.
So thank
Thank
you so
you. As
much.
did I.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. We appreciate you being here.
All
We'll
right.
talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you for listening to Textbook. If something you heard today stays with you, take it back to your own campus and feel free to share it with a colleague or friend. We'll see you next time.